Did you watch the video I just put out where I made like basically a little short film? Thanks to Easton and Patrick for helping me on that. But today in this video, we're actually going to talk about the RED Komodo, which is the camera that we used to shoot that short film. Now, generally speaking on this channel, I take a camera and I put it through its paces. I set up some environments and I shoot with it to see how I would use it on a real set, and that was probably the best way I could have done it, other than a commercial maybe. I'm sure a lot of people that are buying the RED Komodo or are interested in the RED Komodo are actually looking for it for commercial use. But you know, a lot of TV series and films are actually shot on the RED, so it kind of made sense also to use it in a short film. You know, one of my favorite directors of all time is David Fincher. He shoots all of his stuff on RED, so I thought it'd be kind of fun to kind of give it that vibe. I didn't go really heavy-handed on the color grade on that last film. I kind of wanted to kind of keep it neutral, a little bit more like Fincher. So I thought that was a really good way of testing out the camera, really like throwing it into an environment, that I would actually use it on. We used it on a gimbal, we used it handheld, and we used it on a tripod. We used it in different formats. We mostly shot everything at the medium quality codec on the camera, just to kind of get that middle grade data rate. If you use the highest quality one, you are going to burn up a hard drive so fast. And when you're shooting raw like that, you really don't need that highest quality unless you're doing like crazy, like, I don't even know, green screen effects or something like that, or like a big Hollywood movie. For the most part, I almost never shoot at the highest quality on a camera because it's just not worth it in a workflow. Something to be said about the RED, actually, even at their lowest quality, the data rate on that is still pretty high. I would say if you wanted to compare it to the Pocket 6K or the Blackmagic cameras, B-RAW and stuff like that, it's probably up there still. So even their lowest one is not going to be comparable to the lowest one on a Blackmagic camera. Like Q5 or something like that on a Blackmagic camera is going to be much less data rate than the lowest quality on the RED. Something to think about. I don't know if you probably have already watched a couple of reviews of the RED Komodo, which is why I'm not going to do a full review over the camera. I'm basically going to tell you my experience using it and the things that I actually liked about it and the things I really didn't like about it. This is basically my love-hate relationship with this camera, and that's what we're going to talk about in this video. But that's something to think about with other reviews. If they're comparing it to other cameras and whatnot, you need to realize that the data rates and the compression difference between Blackmagic RAW or any other camera really and RED RAW is quite different. There's actually way less compression than you think going on a RED file. That's what kind of makes it such a professional camera. That being said, even their highest quality data rate is probably not as high as a RAW DNG, something like coming from a Sigma FP, or even the highest quality of ProRes RAW. Because it's a variable bitrate, it probably is going to get much higher than the highest quality coming from a RED. But that doesn't really make a difference. The image quality is basically going to be amazing no matter what when you're shooting on RED. There's just a couple things that you have to make sure you do. You have to make sure you black shade every time you enter a new setting with like a new temperature in the room, because your camera, that sensor, will perform differently if you do not do that black shade. Now, a lot of cameras have this functionality, but a lot of them don't have as sensitive of a sensor, whereas the RED, because it's true raw, you're gonna have a really noisy image if you don't do this every time. But based on my experience using this camera, let's just jump right into the things that I like about it. Now, I've basically shot on every single RED camera that's ever been made except for the RED Monstro, so I'm quite familiar with the RED codec and the image. This one's a little bit different. That global shutter on there is pretty fun. If you notice the handheld shot in the shot inside the film where we're running outside and we're handheld, looks pretty good. I would say that handheld shot looks pretty awesome because it is a global shutter, and it's something I did not think about until afterwards, and I got it in post and I was like, why does this look so natural? Why does this look so good? Either Easton Oliver is really good at handheld, or that global shutter is doing a lot, or maybe a combination of the two. But this is an easy transition. The first thing that I really wanted to talk about was the raw image coming out of the camera. I really like the RED RAW workflow. I've always liked RAW workflow. If you heard me talk about all cameras on the channel before, I'm pretty picky. I want a RAW camera. Now, I've shot on ARRI cameras a lot, and I've exclusively shot in ProRes on those cameras, but almost always in 444. But you don't have that control in post to be able to change the white balance, the ISO. When you have that raw data from a sensor and then you like use noise reduction and stuff like that in post, it's just much better to have that raw than to having any of that stuff happen in the camera. Just having that full control is what I'm always looking for in a camera that I'm purchasing myself. Now, of course, that's not how it is for everyone in the market, but I'm guessing if you're looking at RED cameras, you're looking for that raw codec, and that's probably one of the top reasons I would buy this camera over any other camera on the market. Of course, I'm a Blackmagic fan. I have a Pocket 6K, but why do I have that? it's because of that RAW workflow. So unlike other RED cameras, this does only have 3 settings, a low quality, medium quality, and a high quality. And like I said before, the data rates change depending on that. But either way, you're getting a really nice image out of all of those, which is really convenient to be able to switch between those to, you know, save on space and data rate and stuff like that, depending on what you're shooting. If you're just shooting like an interview, maybe kick it over to low quality so you can get more space on your card. But if you're comparing it to other box cameras like this in the market, you basically have to compare it to the Z cams, and they don't really have a good RAW workflow. You have to basically use their 10-bit files coming out of those cameras, and that's where I would quickly jump to the RED Komodo for a Z cam, is that you actually get true RAW out of the camera. And then the next thing obviously would be the global shutter, like I just talked about. The global shutter from the sensor is really fun. It's really unique. It's something that's only been in a couple cameras in the past. Actually, Blackmagic did make a global shutter camera a while ago, the Ursa Mini 4K, and no one really talked about that. That's probably because that camera wasn't very good, the dynamic range wasn't very good, but I did have a global shutter, and the global shutter has always been really appealing because if you're doing anything action related or fast moving, or even honestly if you're doing something like special effects work, you want to be able to have full control of the image. So you've got RAW workflow, and then you've got that global shutter that's just going to make it look real. It's going to be how your eye perceives things. It's going to be how if you were shot on film something would look, because that's an actual, you know, one slide after one slide after one slide. First, obviously the rolling shutter, that's going to give you jello effects. It's a no-brainer. That's one of the reasons to pick up this camera, and it's something that I already found in the field seemed like it was pretty nice. It's just a big bonus. I would just really wish that all cameras moving forward had global shutter, but I understand the limitations of that. You can lose dynamic range, whereas this camera really doesn't. This camera seems to have as much dynamic range as other RED cameras, and it has a global shutter. So I bet we start to see more global shutter cameras come out in the RED lineup here soon, or maybe across the board. Maybe these things are going to start to get more affordable with a dynamic range. Blackmagic, if you released a full frame camera that had global shutter and RAW, just take my money, take it all. I want this camera, Blackmagic. Please just give it to me. But I want to just jump right into the thing that I think is the most interesting about this camera, which I bet a lot of people aren't going to think it's the thing I'm going to say, but it's my favorite thing about the camera as someone that creates content for YouTube and also does commercial work. I really love the wireless app that comes with this camera. I mostly used it on my iPad, and when I shot that last film, it was super handy. Like, rather than having to hook up a wireless kit, I was able just to, with almost no latency, less latency than my Hollyland wireless kit for sure, be able to see the image and control the camera from my iPad. Now, I know other cameras on the market can do this as well. Something like that is so handy. If you are on set, your AC could have it on their phone. They could control the camera from you if you're off far away. It's actually using internal Wi-Fi, so it's a pretty strong connection. Or, you know, you can even use Wi-Fi in your house or your network, wherever you're at, to make it even have a bigger range, which is really interesting as well. Maybe you're on a director's monitor, you could use it as a director's monitor and control the camera. Maybe if you have like a camera operator or something like that, or maybe if you're on like a steady cam. And also from that screen, you can control the autofocus on there. You can do basically anything that you really want to do from the app, and it works really well. It wasn't like it was giving me any hiccups. It's pretty easy to connect. Just for me, I don't know, but that's something that was really interesting to me. I think why a lot of people might want to buy this camera is its small form factor, right? It's a small run and gun package. You can put it anywhere. You can do whatever you want with it, basically, and it's like this little crash cam cube, right? So the more stuff you can take off of it, the better. And I think that the fact that you don't have to put a wireless kit on it and you can just have wireless monitoring already built into it with basically zero latency. You could easily have a focus puller use this. I'm sure it would drop frames every once in a while because it is just a digital Wi-Fi signal. I'm sure it would drop frames, but for the most part, you could probably pull focus off this and use it like you would use any other monitor, which is really handy. I mean, can you imagine you just take your iPad out of your case, you give it to the director, you say, hey, here's the image. And you're not worrying about putting a wireless kit on there, getting a big monitor and doing all that. Although I love big monitors, and I love those wireless systems, this is just so handy to have built in for the cost. So if you're thinking about, you know, the Blackmagic Pocket 6K, for instance, yes, it costs way less than the Komodo, but then you're going to rig those things onto the camera, which you will not have to do with the Komodo. So it's kind of like a built-in cost is how I would perceive it. Someone for like me that does like content creation like this, right now it'd be so handy if I could just have the iPad out and I could be looking at the image and hitting stop and record by myself, and I would pay a little extra to have that functionality just built into the body of the camera and not have to rig that out. You can also pull focus on it. You can literally turn this there's a digital knob on there where you can pull focus. So if you don't even have a wireless follow focus, you can have your AC pulling focus on an autofocus lens, of course, from the app. You can even set marks on there. You can set the speed on there. You can have it do an autofocus pull for you. You can basically pick 2 points, pick a speed, and have it track someone for you. A lot of super handy features that are just like these digital features that you would have to pay a lot of money for to get it in a bigger wireless kit. It's just built into the app. So yeah, I could probably go on about the app all day, but something just that if you kind of like that convenience, yeah, of course it's not perfect, but for $6,000 in the camera and a RED image, I feel like this wireless app is like one of the bigger bonuses for me when we're talking about this camera. It's something that actually sets it apart from other cameras. There are other cameras that can do this, of course, but I just feel like RED's is really good and you're getting that with the raw workflow. So those two combined make it much more appealing. Another thing I really like about the camera is the RF mount. I think the Canon RF mount is going to be one of the mounts of the future. The EF mount is going to die anytime here soon. It's really sad. I have so much EF glass. My Pocket 6K is an EF camera. But that RF is going to take over because it works with the mirrorless cameras and you can adapt any lens to it. So that's pretty awesome. Of course, other RED cameras have interchangeable mounts, but you have to buy these interchangeable mounts for them. They cost money, quite a bit of extra money because they're RED specific mounts. But if you just have that RF mount already on the camera, on the Komodo, you can buy much more inexpensive adapters and mounts for it. And you can basically put any lens under the sea on the camera, which is super handy. Of course, you can also put that Canon RF to EF speed booster on there to make that sensor even bigger. That's really exciting. And it does have a little bit of a bigger sensor, a 17:9 sensor than like my Pocket 6K, for instance. So it gets even bigger with that focal reducer. So that's something that's really cool about this camera. The RF mount is future-proofing your camera. It's something that'll last longer. So if you want to invest into that ecosystem, it will definitely be better for the future. I really like that. Really dig that. I wish my cameras had RF mount on them. Downside of that real quick though is that the RF mount doesn't have autofocus, I believe. So if you get these new Canon RF lenses and you put it on there, don't expect autofocus to work because they have not figured out that yet. Of course, that's something that they will figure out and that's something they will eventually put in the camera based on what I've read online, but it's not there yet. Which leads me into the last thing, the other things I really like about this camera, and that's the autofocus. It's more that it has the autofocus. It's pretty good. It's kind of interesting. Like when it's working, it works really well. Like when you get it set up in the right environment and you've got it kind of dialed in on a subject, it works really well. It works a lot better than like Panasonic, for instance. And it's really interesting to have such a high-end camera with basically the only raw camera that has autofocus. So that's really appealing. So if you want both those things, once again, it's taking these capabilities that a lot of other cameras have, but combining it with the raw workflow, the RED raw workflow, and a global shutter. So it's putting all that together that makes this camera so appealing. You know, Sony cameras have way better autofocus than the Komodo, but they don't have that raw workflow. Although it has a big plus of this camera, it also is a big downside of this camera because the autofocus isn't great. Also, each lens kind of has its own character with the autofocus. Some work better than others. But I found if I'm like, say I'm at this distance and I'm moving back and forth like this, no problems. It's probably gonna stay on me just fine. It's when you bring something really close to the sensor, it kind of like pushes it too far and then it doesn't know how to get back. Say if you brought something in and then pulled it back out, it may not be able to find that. This is all in beta basically still, so I'm sure they're always constantly working on the autofocus. But you know, Patrick Tommaso, he also tested it out and he was trying to use it on a gimbal. It was not working for him on the gimbal. It just couldn't, if anything backlights the sensor, if your subject is backlit too much and it washes out the sensor, the autofocus tends to get a little bit more hunty, which is weird because it's not contrast-based autofocus, so you would think that wouldn't be an issue, but it seems to be an issue anyways on this camera. But if you're in a pretty good contrasty scene, you're not moving at super far distances and doing crazy moves, you probably won't be doing that anyways. It could definitely replace your focus pooler in the right environments. It's just something you have to think about. It can still miss, just like anything like this, but also your focus pooler can still miss. So it's really up to you. I think it is a bonus of this camera, but it's also a downside of the camera because if you're buying this camera for that, you can't actually rely on it, or at least I wouldn't rely on it on set. I would only use it if I had to, but it's nice that the functionality is there. Which kind of takes us down into the cons of the camera, my hates on this camera. So of course the autofocusing is kind of a love-hate on its own. But then the next thing I really don't like about the camera is the menu system. Menu systems is a tricky subject to talk about with cameras these days. Everyone has a different one. You know I hate the Sony menu system. And I've always been okay with the RED menu system. It's always had like a touch screen on it. It's fairly big boxes. You could control a lot of things. There's a lot of control, which I've always liked about these cameras. But the problem with this one is that you're having to work around this little screen that's on top. And rather than doing something like Blackmagic, which Blackmagic, guys, you've got the best UI in the game, hands down. It's so simple, it makes so much sense. You click on one thing, it takes you to a whole other page. You have lots of finger real estate to do what you want to do. RED's design is super strange. There's all these weird beveled edges on the graphics, and some things are just too tiny. If you're in like the playback mode and you want to like scrub through playback, you inevitably are gonna hit the info button on there and it's gonna bring up all this other information. You're not gonna be able to scrub right, and I just can't get on board with the menu system. It does a lot, there's a ton of functionality, but guys, make it more simple. Make the buttons bigger, give us more pages, clean it up. Like, give me the like go-to things, and like they're just jamming so much information on the small screen, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. The histogram's super tiny. So just keep that in mind when you get this camera. It does do a lot, but I would honestly rather just have the app open at all time and change everything from the app because it's a bigger screen, do it there rather than using it on the camera. Speaking of the camera itself, the body itself is another thing that I actually don't love. I think once again, a lot of people are gonna buy this camera because it's a little cube. It's a little cube that you can rig out and do whatever you want with, which is great. And there are a lot of good sides to that. The rigging that you can buy for the camera, there's quite a bit of good accessories already for it, but there's some downsides to this. There's some limitations. RED has always done this. They've always made these cube style cameras. There is no HDMI port on here. You have that little screen, it's locked in on top, which is fun in some scenarios. If you want to hip shoot, you can look at that screen, but you can't really use that screen to shoot your video on because the actual video portion of the screen is much tinier than the whole screen. It doesn't fill up the whole screen, so it's kind of pointless. It's not like a Blackmagic camera where you can actually use the whole screen as your display. And then I like the mic placement on the side of it, but it only has the one SDI port on the back, and it kind of comes out kind of funny on the back. I wish it was off to the side like most other cinema cameras, so it's just easier to access and you don't have to put little like BNC adapter, SDI adapters on there to make it easy to grab and pull off and on. And then if you start to put accessories on there, it's harder to get to those. If you put the V-mount plate on there that I was using, it makes it even harder to get to the SDI port. And what was always awesome about RED cameras was that you could put these cableless monitors on top of them. And so you could just operate like this with your monitor on top of the cube, and there's no cables. They put some leads on top there so you could have a start and stop record button on the handle, but they didn't give you the option to be able to use one of their monitors that way. And so then you have to buy the small HD monitor that has touch control, but then you have to have two different cables to run that monitor. And from what I can tell, those small HD monitors, I've used them on other cameras, on other REDs as well, and I don't like that workflow at all. The camera already takes 30 seconds to turn on, and it takes another 30 seconds to basically connect the touch screen on that. Something I didn't love about that. I really wish they just could have integrated some of that DSMC2 functionality into the body, and it would have been a lot better. Okay, so let's just take a quick break real quick to talk about today's sponsor, which is Squarespace. Guys, I think it's about time that I redo my website. I've basically had the same template on my website for like the last 5 years, but with Squarespace it's super easy. I'm gonna be able to go in there and pick out a new template and find something that just aesthetically works for me and something I think is gonna be eye-catchy to clients, future clients out there, and rebuild my website. And I'm not intimidated about this at all because I've been using Squarespace for a long time now, the better part of a decade, and it's just so easy to work with. I think I just want to clean it up a little bit, make it a little bit more simple. Definitely keep that contact page on there, which Squarespace has a ton of form options on the website, so you can basically build a contact page completely custom for different reasons. And I just love that it's a custom page that's on your website. They don't even have to leave your website to send you an email, basically. It's just like a more foolproof way of making sure that someone that finds your work and likes it can contact you directly. So if you're anything like me and you need to present your work online, well, just build a website with Squarespace. Click the link in the description to get 10% off, and I want to thank Squarespace for sponsoring this video. So that's basically my thoughts on the camera, but before we go, let's just do a quick side-by-side test. See some images coming out of the camera compared to my Pocket 6K. I like to compare everything to the Pocket 6K on the channel. Obviously, it's my main camera, it's the camera that I own, but also because it is the camera I recommend to everybody still to this day. So I always like to compare other cameras to it, so you can actually see the difference in image quality based on the price. So we're talking about a $6,000 camera here, and we're talking about a $2,000 camera, the Pocket 6K. I have now been using a $50 infrared filter on my Pocket 6K to make sure I get rid of as much infrared pollution on the camera as I can. $50 has really solved a lot of my color issues with this camera. I highly recommend, if you have a Pocket camera, a 4K or a 6K, or even an Ursa Mini, to get an infrared filter for a camera. Make sure you get the one that has a blue cast on it and not just the red cast. I have a very expensive red infrared filter that I bought years ago for RED cameras, actually, back when they didn't have their own infrared filters built into them. And it does not work on Blackmagic cameras, but this new one I just bought, $50 on Amazon, it's called the Ice infrared filter. It is really helped filter out any pollution on the camera, which gets that color science much closer to cameras like Arri and even this RED. So keep that in mind, all these comparisons have that infrared filter on them, so this isn't going to be a pure clean test with the Pocket 6K sensor as it is. Also, I use different lenses and stuff on this, but just to kind of get an idea how you can push and pull them in the same environment, and basically the differences between the two codecs. And from what I can tell, it's not that much of a difference. The REDs technically should be a little bit beefier, but for what I'm doing, I feel like they both look really good, but I'll just let you guys be the judge. So a lot of you are asking for me to test out the RED Komodo, so here it is. Here are my thoughts on it. Let me know in the comments below what you think about the RED Komodo. Is it going to be your next camera? Why would you choose it over the Pocket 6K or something like that, or some of these other competitors out in the field right now? I actually want to know what you think, because I'm not always right on these things. I use these cameras and I use them for, I talk about them in a way that matters to me and how I shoot, but it might be different for you. I'm always looking for new reasons to use other cameras. So if you think there's something I didn't really talk about with the Komodo that's really handy, let me know in the comments below. And until next time, guys, until I make my next video, I'm Spencer Sakurai. See ya.